start with nutrition. So let us talk all about food, how a living organism gets its food, from where does it get its food, how it takes the food inside its body, what happens to the food once it goes inside the body of a living organism. So nutrition, as I mentioned before also, that to do any kind of work we need energy. And where does this energy come from? The energy comes from food. It basically comes from the nutrients which are present inside the food, right? So work would mean any kind of work. For example, doing exercises, doing any kind of physical work like cutting down a tree, or when you are running, or even when you are thinking, you need energy. Have you ever observed that if you are very hungry and if your mom says you that go and sit for your study, will you be able to concentrate? You are not, because you are hungry inside. You don't get that much of energy to study well or to think well, right? So even when you are sleeping, even then you need some kind of energy, because there are some processes which are taking place inside your body. That's why you would have heard that often people complain that if I don't eat anything for dinner, I do not get good sleep in an empty stomach, right? Even for, as I said, while for studying also you need a lot of energy, and that is why these days you would have seen that your moms must be giving you the health drinks like Complan, Horlicks and many such nutritious food, so that you get so much of energy so that you can concentrate better on your studies, right? So whatever. Now for any kind of work we do, we need a lot of energy, and this is not only true for human beings, but this is true for all life forms. So I gave you the example of human beings because you can relate it better, right? So it is true for plants as well as other life forms as well, correct? So in nutrition, what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about the way food is obtained by an organism, how each organism receives its food, from where does it get its food. And the second thing which we will talk about is how the complex food which is taken by an organism is converted into a simple form which can be absorbed by the cells, because the need of food or the need of energy is a demand of the cells inside our body. The body is ultimately made up of cells, and each cell generates energy, so they need some energy to perform the various metabolic activities. So at the same time, the cells cannot digest complex foods. They cannot utilize complex foods for their energy needs. So they need energy in simpler forms. So how this complex food are converted into simpler food, that also we will talk about in nutrition, right? So not only animals, in case of plants also we see that we get fruits, flowers, etc. And these plants also need food as well, because if you do not, how does the plant get food? We will talk about that later. But for now you can think that if we don't give proper water, if we do not allow proper sunlight to fall on the plants, they tend to dry up. They do not live under such conditions, right? So even plants also need energy, and that is why even plants also need food, correct? So this is where we show the necessity of nutrients for the plants. So not only water and sunlight, there are so many other nutrients which are needed by a plant. For example, you would have seen that in your garden also, the gardener often enriches the soil with so many different fertilizers and manures, so that the soil on which the plant is planted, it is enriched with many minerals which are needed for better growth and development of the plant. Correct? So it is not only about plants or only about human beings, it is about all life forms which is existing on the earth. Each and every life form needs energy, and that energy directly comes from food. Now here in nutrition we will talk about how that food is obtained by an organism and how that complex food is converted into a simpler form. So with this introduction on nutrition, let us try to define nutrition. How do we define nutrition? It is the process of obtaining food and changing it into simple absorbable form. Right? Now the question is, why do organisms need food at all? The first thing, the basic thing is it provides energy. Now how it provides energy and how the process takes place, we will talk about all that. Also the food contains nutrients. For example, You have different types of foods, which are enriched with different types of nutrients. For example, there are food like rice or potato, which are very rich in carbohydrates. Similarly, you have pulses, which are very rich in proteins. You have fruits and vegetables, the green vegetables and fruits, which are rich in vitamins, minerals, right? You have milk, which is rich in calcium and phosphorus. So you have different food materials which are enriched with different kinds of nutrients, and our body needs different types of nutrients for performing many different activities. Not only that, food helps in cell repair and cell growth. So why does a cell actually need energy? Because sometimes a cell might get damaged. So for the repair of that cell, we need some energy. Similarly, for the growth of the cell, the growth of a living organism is because the number of cells increases or because the cell size increases. So for both of them, we need energy. So that is why we need food. It also increases resistance against diseases. You would have seen that people often say that if you do not eat properly, you will fall ill soon. Why? That's because when we eat well, we actually provide our body with all the necessary nutrients. So the body stays healthy, and as a result, the immune system of the body grows stronger. What is immune system? Immune system is the soldier of our body. It actually helps to fight against infections. It helps to fight against diseases. So if your body is healthy, your immune system is stronger, and you will tend to get diseases less, right? So I have discussed about the immune system in detail in class 9th, correct? So the immunity of the body also increases. Okay, so quickly let us look at this. What are nutrients? So here we have defined nutrients, a substance that provides nourishment needed for growth and maintenance of life. So every living organism needs nutrients for its proper growth and development, right? So now we understood what is nutrition. Nutrition is all about, it is all in and around food. And why do we need food? To get nutrients, for energy, for cell repair and growth, and also for better immunity of the body. So now let us look at the first part of nutrition, that is, how do organisms obtain food? So from where the different types of living organisms get their food. So let us see what are the ways by which organisms get their food. Now there are two modes of nutrition. So what do I mean by modes of nutrition? That means the way by which an organism gets its food. So there are basically two broad classifications of modes of nutrition. The first is autotrophic and the second one is heterotrophic. Now, what is autotrophic? Auto. The word auto itself means self. So that means this word auto means self. So autotrophic means the organism will prepare its own food. So it is self-dependent. The organism will not depend on anybody else for its food. Similarly, heterotrophic. Hetero means others. So these kind of organisms will depend on others for their food. So broadly, there are two ways of obtaining food. One is preparing our own food, and the other one is obtaining our food from some other organism. Right? So now let us look at the autotrophic and the heterotrophic mode of nutrition one by one. Now the autotrophic nutrition, as I said, so these organisms will prepare their own food. Now there are two classifications in this also. Now what are the organisms which prepare their own food? The best examples are the green plants. How do they prepare their own food? They prepare their own food by the process of photosynthesis. Right? We have spoken about all these things in class 9th also. So photosynthesis means in presence of sunlight, with the help of the green pigment called chlorophyll, which is present in the leaves of the plants, they will prepare their food. So that is they are known as photosynthetic. So some autotrophic animals can be photosynthetic. That means they prepare food in presence of sunlight. Photo means light. So they prepare food in presence of sunlight with the help of chlorophyll, right? And the other kind of autotrophic organisms are chemosynthetic. What is the word chemo? Chemo is derived from the word chemical. So these organisms use chemical energy which is released during oxidation of organic compounds to prepare their food. So the first kind of organisms, since they are photosynthetic, and photo means light, so they use light energy to prepare food. And chemosynthetic, chemo means chemical, so they use chemical energy to prepare their food. So these animals together prepare their own food, whether it is photosynthetic or chemosynthetic. Examples are plants, some algae and bacteria. So plants fall under the category of photosynthetic. So under the category of photosynthetic, we can give the examples of plants. Under the category of chemosynthetic, we can consider some bacteria. For example, there are some specific bacteria like sulfur bacteria or nitrosomonas bacteria, which is generally found in the soil. These kind of organisms are chemosynthetic. That means they prepare their own food with the help of chemical energy. So this is all about autotrophic nutrition. Let us now look at the heterotrophic nutrition. Heterotrophic nutrition means these organisms depend on others for their food. Examples: animals, humans, fungi. So all animals is a very general term under which you will have so many different types of organisms, right? So all animals, including human beings, fungi, they are all heterotrophic. So they all depend on others for their food. So if you take the examples of us human beings, so many of you might think that while even we prepare our own food, we have seen our moms preparing food in the kitchen, so she is preparing our food, so we are preparing our own food, so we should be autotrophic. But that is not how it is. We are preparing food. We are actually, what we are doing in the kitchen is that we are actually modifying the food materials in a tastier form or in a consumable form. But from where are we getting those raw materials which we use in the kitchen? For example, what do we cook? We cook the vegetables which we obtain from plants, or those who are vegetarian, they cook meat which we obtain from animals, or we prepare egg which again we obtain from animals. So whatever raw materials which we use for our food, we obtain them either from plants or animals. So that means we are also heterotrophic. Correct? So now heterotrophic also can be classified into many different types. The first one is saprophytic. The word sapro itself means dead. The term sapro means dead. So saprophytic mode is the mode wherein the organism feed on dead and decomposed matter. So in saprophytic mode of nutrition, the organism obtains its food from dead and decomposed matter. So from dead, the organism will actually feed on dead plants and animals. And the example of saprophyte is fungi. So fungi are the saprophytes. They feed on dead and decayed objects. The next one is parasitic. What is parasitic? Parasitic means there are some organisms which live inside the body of another organism and obtain its food from that organism. Let us look at this example. You would have heard that many people have worms inside their stomach. So they got some stomach infection because of the presence of some worms. So what are these worms? These worms are also living organisms, but they are living inside our body and they are getting their food from our body, right? So they are also heterotrophic, but in order to get their food, they are living inside another organism's body. So they are known as parasitic, right? So examples of parasitic would be Plasmodium, the malarial parasite. What is malarial parasite? When a mosquito bite, the malaria is generally caused by mosquito bite. So what happens when the mosquito bites us? It actually transfers this Plasmodium parasite into our blood. So now the Plasmodium parasite stays inside our body. It gets its nutrients from our body and cause a disease called malaria in our body. So another example of parasitic would be lice. The lice which is present in our hair, it obtains nutrition from our body. So these are all examples of parasitic organisms. Not only Plasmodium, there are many kind of worms which also stay inside the body of another organisms. The third one is Holozoic. What is Holozoic? Holozoic means intake of complex organic matter as food. That means there are some organisms which take complex food. complex organic matter is taken as food. The best example is human beings. What do we eat? We eat things like rice, wheat, right? Or bread or meat. So if you look at them, they are all complex things. They are not, we do not take glucose as food. Glucose is something which is very simple. But now those simple things combine together to form complex things. And we take those complex things as food. So what happens is that, let us suppose if we take in rice, as I mentioned before also, the cells inside our body cannot directly utilize that rice for energy. So that rice, since it is a complex matter, it needs to be broken down into simpler forms. And what are those simpler forms? Simpler forms are like glucose, which make the carbohydrates. Glucose will combine together and it will form all complex molecules to form very complex carbohydrates. Similarly, proteins. When we talk of proteins, they are made up of, the basic units of protein are the amino acids. So many amino acids will combine together and then they will form proteins, right? Similarly, fats. Fats are again formed by many fatty acids. So you would have studied about the structure of all these things in your chemistry. If you want to know more about the structure of these kind of things like carbohydrates, proteins or fats, you can refer to the video on biomolecules on chemistry class 12. Just for your information. So basically Holozoic means the animals will take in complex organic matter as their food, and the best examples of Holozoic animals are human beings. So let us now talk about the Holozoic animals, because in the Holozoic group also we have a variety of animals. It is not only the human beings. Most of the animals which we see around us, they are mostly Holozoic. So intake of complex organic matter as food. So they are also further classified into 3 categories. So now let us look at the different categories of Holozoic animals. The first is herbivores. Herbivores is derived from the word herbs. Herbs means plants. So this term herb means plants. So these are the organisms which feed on plants. Example, cow, goat, horse, rabbit. They are all examples of herbivores. The next is carnivores. That means those which feed on flesh. So examples would be tiger, lion, right? Now there are a large variety of animals which feed on both plants as well as flesh. Can you give me one example of those kind of animals? Right, human beings. We ourselves, we feed on both flesh as well as plants. So they are known as omnivores. That means they feed on both plants and animals. Examples would be humans, crow, pig, rat. So since there were too many Holozoic animals, so they were further classified depending upon whether they feed only on plants, only on flesh, or on both plants and flesh. So what did we conclude? Based on our study on modes of nutrition, we concluded that heterotrophs depend on autotrophs directly or indirectly. So autotrophs are the ones which prepare their own food. So they are self-dependent. They do not depend on anybody for their food. But heterotrophs has to depend on the autotrophs in some way or the other. So they will depend on the autotrophs directly when they directly feed on plants. For example, the herbivores. They will depend on the autotrophs indirectly when they do not feed on the plants directly, but they feed on something which feed on plants. So if you look at the herbivores, they are directly dependent on plants. But if you look at the carnivores, they are indirectly dependent on plants, because the carnivores feed on other animals. For example, a lion can feed on a goat. But the goat in turn feeds on the plants. So if there are no plants, there will be no goat, because goat cannot survive without plants. Now if there are no goat, then carnivores, that is lion, cannot survive. So lion is also dependent on plants, but it is not directly dependent on plants. It is indirectly dependent on plants. So we can say that heterotrophs will always depend on autotrophs, either directly or indirectly. Right? Okay. So let us now talk about the Holozoic nutrition. So we spoke about Holozoic animals, that means the animals which will take in complex food. So let us talk about the nutrition of Holozoic animals. That means we first part is over. We already saw that how the animals obtain their food. That part is done. Now we need to see that how the food is taken inside our body and how that food is absorbed and digested by the body. So in case of, we'll talk about Holozoic nutrition means we will talk about how the complex food is taken in and it is converted into a simple form, in a form which is absorbable by the cells. So any Holozoic nutrition will involve a series of steps in order to convert the complex food into a simpler form. So the first would be ingestion. Ingestion means intake of food in complex form. It means whatever the food is, maybe whether it is chow mein or it is a dosa or it is rice, whatever it is, we will take that food in. So that intake of food, that process is known as ingestion. The word ingest in itself tells you it is intake of food. Next is digestion. That is conversion of complex food into simpler form by enzymes. So what are enzymes? Enzymes are the substances which is present inside our body which aggravates the chemical reactions taking place inside our body. Right? Because there are so many chemical reactions which will actually take place inside the body. So these enzymes which will actually help in those chemical reactions. So they will help to convert the complex food into simpler form. Next is absorption. So now once the food is converted into a simpler form, so that food can be absorbed by the cells. So the passage of simpler food into blood or lymph is known as absorption. So once that simple food is passed into the blood, what happens? Blood is present everywhere inside the body, right? So it gets absorbed within the body. Assimilation is absorbed food being utilized for energy needed for various activities. So now once the food is absorbed by the body, first the food is complex, so food has to be converted into simpler form. That is done by digestion. Now that simple food needs to be absorbed by the body, so that is done by absorption. Now the absorbed food needs to be utilized for energy, so that passage of that food into the blood or the lymph, so that it reaches each and every organ, so that it can be utilized further for energy, is known as assimilation, right? But during this nutrition process, the energy is not created. The food is just assimilated. That means assimilation means that there will be some molecules inside the body which will actually contain that food. So some molecules will be enriched with that absorbed food. So then in the next process of respiration, those assimilated molecules will actually produce energy which can be used by the body, right? So you understand the difference between assimilation and respiration. Correct? Okay. So this is all about Holozoic nutrition. So now from the next slide onwards, we are going to talk about the nutrition in different types of organisms. So we will start with simpler organisms. Simpler organisms would mean the unicellular organisms which have only one cell. So when there is one cell, there is less complexity, right? So we'll start our discussion with amoeba. Correct? Okay, so before that, let us look at the last step, which is egestion, that is removal of undigested food. So even though a good portion of the food will get digested, there will be some amount of food which will not get digested. So we do not want to keep that undigested food inside our body. We do not want to accumulate that undigested things. So we want to bring that out of our body. So that removal of undigested food is known as egestion. So don't get confused between ingestion and egestion. Ingestion, in means intake of food. Egestion means removal of food, right? So ingestion, digestion, absorption, assimilation and egestion together would constitute the Holozoic nutrition.